All right, let's start. So once again, thank you for joining this webinar on fundamentals of 3D experience. My name is Mark Young with xLM Solutions, and today hopefully we'll give you a good overview of 3D experience. To start off, and for those of you that do not know us, I always give this introductory slide, but we at xLM Solutions consider ourselves a full PLM service company. That means we do not sell software, but we provide services and solutions on various PLM products. And we do everything from discovery workshops, general implementations, customizations, integrations, data migrations, training, and support. Um, as we provide, various PLM services, we focus mainly on the Dassault PLM products, with that being 3DEXPERIENCE, both the on-cloud and on-premise versions, which we'll talk about today, but also other Dassault products such as SolidWorks PDM, Innovia Smart Team, etc. We are, even though we're not a reseller, we are certified and recognized by Dassault and SolidWorks. We are part of the SolidWorks Certified Professional Service Program, and we've been in business since 2005 and bring many years of expertise on both the business and process point of view of PLM, and then technically how to make all the nuts and bolts work. We really bring cross-industry knowledge. We have industry working, with many different industries, everything from automotive to aerospace and defense, consumer goods, industrial equipment, medical devices, etc. We're highly, in addition to, let's say, the industry knowledge, we're highly have a lot of expertise around, various technical knowledges, whether that's databases, programming languages, integration technology, cybersecurity, and even, the buzzword AI that we bring to the table. And then, I always say we're driven by excellence. We're always here to make sure our customer is happy at the end of the day. We're always striving to be up to speed on the latest technology, industry trends, best practices, etc. in the market. So all that being said, let's get started with the webinar, and let's give you a fundamental introductory to 3D experience. So, this webinar, there's probably gonna be a lot of information. We have an hour. We're not gonna cover everything. There's tons of topics, even from an introductory point of view around 3D experience. My goal is really to get you thinking, get your get you a basic understanding of 3D experience, some of the lingo that is told, how some basic things work, but there'll probably be a lot of things that I don't cover and a lot of things that we could cover in a lot more detail. So, with that being said, if you do have questions, comments, whatever, hold them to the end. I will answer them, but also you can reach out to me and we can go over them outside this webinar as well. Also, the structure of the webinar is I start off kind of giving you an overview. I get into a little bit of some administration of how to create users, then go back to some general functionality, and then go back into some administration. So I jump around a little bit. That's just kind of how the webinar was structured and the description was structured, but hopefully everyone on it can follow along properly. But with that being said, when you log into 3D experience, you will see a screen that looks something like you see, on the screen here. And it has various components going on. So the first component, we'll just go down the list, is what's considered the compass. And by clipping on the compass, you get access to all different roles or widgets or functionality you have in the platform. So depending on what you want to do, you can click the compass and then click the role you want to do the work in. So if you want to do engineering, you may be clicking on, the SolidWorks role if you're using SolidWorks. If you want to do, bill of material management, you may want to click on the product architecture role to get to your widget. So by clicking on the compass, you can get to different roles and functionality. To work in CATIA, you would click on the mechanical shape and engineer. Depending on what you click, you will either bring up what's considered the native client, which is like a thick client, mainly around CATIA, Delmia, and Simulia applications, or it will launch what's considered a widget into your dashboard. So the dashboard, I would say, comprises of this part of the screen that you see here. And on the dashboard, you can have different widgets. In this case, I have a product structure widget that shows a bill of material and the ability to view in 3D data in that bill of material in a different widget, which is a 3D compose widget. But your dashboard can compose of widgets. It can compose of different tabs within the dashboard. So this dashboard has 4 different tabs, and I'm looking at widgets on one of those tabs. It can also show data in lists, and I mentioned the tabs and the widgets. We also have the ability to search for data. So you can search for any piece of data you want to bring up on the screen. And I always say it works as a Google search. So you can type in what you want to search for. I want to search for a washer, and it will bring up anything that has washer in the name, whether it's in the title, the part number, the description, even if it's possibly within the CAD or document itself. So it brings up everything that contains the term washer, and then you can filter that through what's called 6W tags. 6W tags aren't shown in the screenshot at this time, but we'll talk about them a little bit later. You also have some advanced searching capabilities if you want to search specifically on part number, description, etc. But if you search, it would bring you back a list, and then you could click on it and open up that data in one of these roles or apps. You also have ability to see notifications. So you can have notifications set up in the system, such as, if you have actions to do, I need to approve this drawing. When it comes to you for approval, a notification will be sent to you, whether by email or stored in the system. You can also subscribe to parts, so when something changes, you can get a notification as well. For cloud users, you have access to 3D Drive, which is sort of like an online FTP site with security, so you can push or upload or download data to a 3D Drive and give users access to it, outside of the system, to access your data. And like I said, a simple point of view, a FTP type of view, but that manages security, has metadata, etc. You have access to your profile, so you can control, your username. You can have a little avatar or picture for you, description of who you are, relationships, etc. You have access to different tenants. So if you're collaborating with different companies or working with different companies, they may have their own tenant, which is, sorry about that, which is kind of the whole system. So you can change tenants if you need to. And then you have access to your 3D swim communities, which is kind of, your social, your online, ability to have messages, wikis, and let's say non-governed controlled collaboration. A lot of times I consider it to Facebook within the 3DEXPERIENCE terms. So this is a big overview of the platform. I may said a lot. I also have the platform running live if we want to dig into anything. But this is kind of the big interface. And again, for initial users, it's a lot to digest, but once you start using it, it becomes pretty easy to use. Just to talk about some terms I may use a lot. In the system, there's what's considered different types. So, each type has its own functionality, its own set of fields and behaviors. There's a lot more types in the system that I listed here, but I listed just a handful of common ones that will be used. So a physical product represents, let's say, an item or an engineering item. And it can also represent behind the scenes the CAD data that you create as well from a 3D point of view. A drawing would represent a 2D drawing. A document would represent a, let's say, non-CAD document, whether that's Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. An issue is a type that allows users to create issues in the system and track them. Bookmarks are a way to manage or structure data, kind of like in a Windows folder point of view. Change action, which I didn't have a little icon for, but allows you to control changes in the system, or one way to control changes. Projects are a way to manage project data, and projects are composed of tasks. And then, we have manufacturing items, etc. So all these are different types that have different properties and behaviors within the system. But and I may be using these terms, throughout this presentation, so I just wanted to talk about it up front. The main, or one of the main ones when dealing with CAD, will be physical products, because that kind of represents the item and the CAD structure. So now I'm going to jump into user management a little bit. And, from an admin point of view, you can obviously invite and create users in the platform. To do that, you have this button here, which says invite members. And on the next slide, we'll show you have to fill out some information. But then you can assign them, the members, roles, what roles they have or what functionality do they need to do. For example, if they were going to be working with SolidWorks, and I'll use SolidWorks a lot, we can assign them the SolidWorks integration role, and you can see how many, let's say, roles or licenses you have and how many are being consumed. You also have for certain processes in the system, you have the concept of tokens and credits. So for example, if you're going to be doing simulations, it in addition to the role, it may take additional credits that you can purchase to run that simulation. But once the user clicks, or once an admin, let's say, and clicks the invite members button, a screen like this comes up, and you need to fill out, the user's email, whether they're going to be a member or an admin, their location, and their location, determines kind of where that data center is going to be that they're going to access. So, obviously you want to fill out a location in a data center that's closest to where they physically exist, and that will be used to optimize performance. A language, and then in the next screen not shown, you can assign them roles depending on the roles. The two mandatory roles that they need to get assigned is called IFW and CSV. So for them to use the platform, those are mandatory roles, but then you can assign them other roles depending on what they need. If they're going to be using SolidWorks, if they're going to be using CATIA, if they're going to be doing change management, the various roles can be assigned. Now, users cannot use the system once we've hit next and finally approved. Basically, the user will get an email saying you need to now create an account in the platform, and they'll click on it. They'll have to, create a password for them, and then once they do that, they get their user will actually be enabled within the system. An administrator also will assign roles to the user and assign that user to different collab spaces. So we're talking now a little bit about security in the system and how user security is managed. I'll admit this is probably one of the more confusing parts of the platform, especially if you have complex security um, requirements. If you need very granular security, this can be complex. If you just need basic security, this can be very easy. But I'm going to talk about some of the different security aspects of the platform now. So when you associate users to the platform or to a collab space, and we'll get into a collab space, they can have various roles. So they can be a contributor, which is basically a viewer, an author, which can create CAD data, can modify, lock and unlock data. A leader, which is, this goes down in order of more functionality. A leader not only can create the data, but can approve and release data. And owners, these other ones are a little bit more on the side. An owner will allow you not only to do a lot of this work, but help manage these collab spaces that I'll talk about. And then an administrator can create users, can do some of the administration capabilities that I'll show you later. And then you have some of these roles, but as a restricted role. And then that restricts what you can do to only the collab space that you belong to. And hopefully this will, again, become more clear as I move on. Now, in addition to roles, you have what's considered collab spaces. Collab spaces are like projects in the system. Not that you want to have, tons of collab spaces, but if you want to segregate your data into different areas, maybe you have a top secret collab space, an engineering collab space, a common data collab space, is a way how you could segregate your data and have different permissions on these different collab spaces. Or I don't know, sometimes projects may be a better word, but I wouldn't necessarily have a collab space for each project. And then collab spaces also have different levels. So private means you must be explicitly assigned to the collab space to see the data if it's set to private. If it's protected, that means any data in that collab space, if it's in work or frozen, you must be explicitly assigned to collab space. But once that data is released or obsoleted, then anyone can see it regardless if they're in the collab space. And then public means anyone can see the data regardless of that collab space. So for example, design libraries, is something that makes sense to go into a public collab space. Now, when you're assigning users to these collab spaces, you get a matrix. So depending on what collab space you're in, and I should say one more thing, there's a third level here. It's called a security vector. Not only is there a collab space, but you can have different companies or organizations within the system. So within a collab space, you could split it up between internal and external companies or engineering, manufacturing, suppliers. Um, so there's a third level of security. Let's not go there though, but there's a third level based on your organization. But basically, you pick the collab space you want to assign users to, and this is done through a widget called Collaborative Space Control Center. But you you pick the collab space, and then you can assign users or groups to that collab space with the role you want to give them to you. So for example, Elon's assigned as a leader, but another user could be assigned as an author, and another user could be assigned as a contributor. And if you have multiple collab spaces, let's say we had a top secret collab space, we could assign Elon as a viewer only to the top secret one, but assign him as a leader to the sandbox one. And when you assign them, that's when you assign the roles I talked about in the previous slides. And that builds what's considered that security matrix of what you can and cannot do. So it says what collab space are you in, what company or organization are you in, and then what leader or what role you have. And based on these three values, that controls your permissions. In addition to the collab space, you can have additional permissions that you can assign um, to control behavior of the collab space as well. User groups. So you can, create user groups. You don't have to assign everything at the user level. You can create user groups and assign things at the user group level. And this goes to, again, giving permissions, like I showed you in the previous slide, or doing approvals, which we'll get to, etc. So again, there is a widget to create user groups, and you can create a group. You can assign users to the groups, and then you can give them responsibilities within that group, whether they can, control adding or removing users to the groups, in addition to the administrator that can do that work. So, user groups are, again, an ability to assign users to groups and then do things at the group level versus the individual user level. So now I'm switching a little bit from the user and the user group point of view to more functionality within the system. And I'm going to start off with change. So there's a lot of ways to handle change within 3DEXPERIENCE. And this slide kind of gives you an overview of some of the different ways to trigger or handle changes within the system. And I guess first, this comes to mind, not listed here, there would be a manual method where the user itself can, move or create new revisions of the document or the CAD data, and move it through its own life cycle. So there's a manual way, but then there's a lot of ways to kind of govern that change in a more governance point of view. So there is change functionality that comes with the system. And again, you have different roles, widgets, and apps for that change functionality. But the change functionality kind of gives you 4 different types of change functionality. The first 2 are very, I'd say, governed in the system. There's a lot of kind of setup and approvals that need to be done before something happens. But at the same time, if making a change costs a lot of money at a company, you want to make sure it goes through the proper approvals before that change happens. So these first 2 are, let's say, much more involved and more complex to set up, but sometimes you need that complexity to make sure that change, makes sense before doing it and then costing the company a lot of money to do it. So a change request allows you to request a change on data, and it goes through a various approval process. You have a whole impact analysis mechanism to see what's impacted by that change and how that will get impacted. And then if that change gets approved, then you can do a change order. And a change order lets you group multiple changes or multiple change actions under one change order. So if that change is going to involve a mechanical change, an electrical change, maybe multiple mechanical changes, you would have what's considered a change action for each individual change, each CAD object or item that needs to be changed. But all those change actions can be grouped under a change order. And then, all the change actions would have to be complete. until that change order can be completed as well. This being said, in many companies, all they use is a change action. So a user can say, hey, this document or object or CAD data needs to be changed. I'm going to associate that to a change action immediately and then have that change action drive the change without needing the overhead and governance of these other two change functionality. Then finally, this has been released recently, so I not the most up to speed on it, but there's the concept of investigation requests. So you might say, I need to, before I can approve this change, I need to formally do an investigation to make sure it makes sense to make that change. So you can create these investigation requests as part of a change request, to determine, the root issue and scope of that change. So all these types formally manage change, though, you might say a change request is too complex for me to run. So what a lot of companies do is saying we have the capability to create an issue in the system. So we can create an issue in the system and then say the outcome of approving that issue is to create a change action to make a change. So companies sometimes have used issues, which are a way to track and monitor issues to act as that change, request to start a change. You also have collaborative tasks in the system. A collaborative task is kind of like managing a Kanban board, I say. You can create a task and then move it to a state of in work and then move it to a state of completed. And again, sometimes these collaborative tasks can be used as a gateway into making changes or managing changes. Through project planning, there's a whole concept of project management, and you can have tasks, which are really collaborative tasks within your project plan, which are used to change and modify data as well. And all this, every time you do the work, it gets recorded in the system. And then finally, regarding changes, there's another what's called a business process management engine that can be used to create your own processes. And this can also be used to govern change as well. And we'll talk about this later in the presentation. A point being is there's a lot of different ways to handle changes in the system. So this is a screenshot of what a change action looks like. And the change action has what's considered a life cycle. And every object that I showed in that initial slide has a life cycle. In this case, it can start in a draft mode. You can put it in work where you're setting up that change action. You can move it to in approvals where it has to be approved. And then it can go through what's considered a route, which we'll talk about in the next slide, to make sure everyone approves it, and then it gets approved. But basically, you associate your data to the change action in a proposed changed state. You can fill out different data about that change, and there's a way to get to more information. And then once you do that, you can move it into in approvals to get it approved. Notice the CAD data, or the physical product here, that's associated to it is in a frozen state. So no more changes are allowed to be made to the CAD data until this change action completely gets approved, and then it will automatically move or change the CAD data to a released state. So that's a high-level screenshot of the change action. And for change actions, you can create what's called approval routes, or routes that say before it goes from in approvals to approved, it needs to go through various people to sign off on it. So when I try to move it into approved, it would go to the design review group to look at the data and approve it. It would go in parallel to a manufacturing review group, an engineering review group, and then to a final review group before it got approved. So as in this slide, let's say the workflow state is fixed of how things get approved. The approvals can be dynamic based on these routes that you create in the system for approvals. It may be an abstract concept, but we can go, in more details if you have questions after the fact. Bookmarks and classification. So ways to organize your data within 3DEXPERIENCE. And there's probably many different ways to organize your data, but two of the most common ways are through what I would say bookmarks and classification. So bookmarks are like a folder structure where you could build, and not saying that it's a Windows folder structure, but like a Windows folder structure where you can build a structure and then associate data to different bookmarks or folders within that structure, and you can browse down through a structure tree, find that bookmark or folder you want, and then see the relevant data associated to that bookmark. So that's one method to do it. That's, let's say, more of a workflow Windows folder type of structure method. Another method is through classification. And again, you build what's considered a classification tree or a taxonomy, and perhaps you do it it's very common through a design library. Maybe you want to classify between mechanical and electrical data, and then under mechanical data you may have washers and bolts and screws, etc. And then under bolts maybe you have hex screw or a round screw or round bolt, etc. And then you can associate your data again to that classification structure that you set up. And one thing that's really powerful that comes with the classification is not only can you assign it to a classification structure, but you can assign it to classification attributes. So for example, if you assign it to a washer, you could have a attribute for inner and outer diameter of that washer. If you assign it to a bolt, you could have an attribute for length of the bolt. So you can have classification specific attributes based on what you assign it to. So these are ways to organize data in the system. Again, as mentioned, 3DEXPERIENCE integrates with various CAD tools. This is a screenshot of the integration with SolidWorks, and you see you kind of have my session that represents 3DEXPERIENCE within the SolidWorks tree, and you can perform your various lock, unlock, promote, change data, etc., right through the SolidWorks integration. And even you have your access to the compass to get access to all the various roles I showed in the first screen. For CATIA users, and when you say CATIA, you got to be careful between CATIA V5 and CATIA 3DEXPERIENCE. For CATIA V5, you would have a similar screen like this, but just with CATIA V5. For CATIA 3DEXPERIENCE, you make use of what's considered the native client, which is a rich client that lets you obviously perform your various modeling functionality within it. And then you have your tree that represents the same structures tree that's saved to 3DEXPERIENCE, and you have all your apps as well through the compass as well. So where in SolidWorks you kind of have that tree in a side panel on the side. In the native app, you have the tree right built into the left-hand panel, of the CAD tool. But you have the same search functionality, etc., that you see through the web client as well. So now I'm going to switch a little bit more to the administration side, and there is again, another role or widget within the system called Collaborative Space Control Center, and that gives you access to a handful of different administration tools to further configure and administrate the system. This list lists most of them in the system, but let's talk about some of them specifically. So I kind of broke some down into different sections here, and we'll talk about them. You can also go to help and get access to them as well. So first one under, probably, and I kind of listed these in most commonly used, for my opinion. But first, attribute management. So we talk about metadata, on the different types, whether it's a physical product, drawing, issue, there's sort of out of the box metadata, such as title, description, etc. But, in many cases, customers need to create additional metadata that doesn't exist. Maybe they want to create something called product type, or they want to have Title 1 and Title 2, or they might want to have an OEM field. So through attribute management, you can create additional attributes in the system, and the attributes can be string, integer, pull down, etc. Revision rules. So again, there's some default revision patterns you can pick in the system, whether you want, alpha or numeric, or, military spec without certain letters, start with a dash, or you can create your own revision patterns in the system as well. I mentioned a lot of times when we talk about revisions, customers have a development revision that a lot of time is numeric, and a prototype revision that's a lot of times numeric, and then a production revision, which is a lot of times alpha. So there's also methodologies to handle that in the system as well. There's also, let's say, configurations we can do to support that too if the out of the box doesn't meet your needs. There's a way to manage CAD, how your CAD integrations will work. So there's a tool or a widget to set up the CAD integration behaviors. Derived outputs. So a lot of times when you save your CAD data to the system or you release it, you want it automatically to create a step file or a PDF of the drawing. So you can configure the system to create those derived output files within the system as well. Part numbering. So, we could have a whole webinar on part numbering, but one of the ways to use part numbering is to set it using this enterprise or identification number field, and there is again another widget to control how that EIN number gets created. And then there's ways, if you make changes to the system, there's configuration management that lets you reload data, helps you import, export settings, etc. Permissions. So I talked about collab spaces and roles that control permissions, but yet there's other sets of tools that give you a finer control on permissions. So there's a permission roles widget that lets you say who can access data based on the role. The maturity graph, which deals with that life cycle that you saw, where the data goes from in work to frozen to release to approved. That can be, there's some manipulation that can be controlled there. Change management has permission functionality. For example, who can release, or do you want to force a change action every time you make a change, or can you want to have users be able to manually make that change without a change action? Lifecycle and collaboration is another one. And then there's additional tools. Talk about how naming can be done. If you want to set up electronic signatures, it's used a lot in medical devices. If you want to set up how bookmarks, states are set up, there's another one as well. So this might be a little bit boring, but there's a lot of tools to do a lot of stuff in the system. Just to give you some screenshots again of some of the tools. So if we want to go into the CAD and the SolidWorks integration, you can control mappings, whether it's an assembly, a part, a drawing between the CAD and the and 3D experience attributes that you created. So you can set up these mappings, and one thing to talk about with SolidWorks, for configurations in SolidWorks, they get mapped to a physical product. So for configurations, they get mapped to a physical product. The file itself gets mapped to an item type called CAD family. And then you have other rules you can set up for the integration, such as auto naming, checking for mandatory attributes, dealing with external references, etc. But there is a widget or a method to control the behaviors of how the CAD works with 3D experience. For revision setups, again, for each type in the system, we can set up its own revision pattern, and we can even create custom revision patterns as well. Now, one thing to mention when we talk about revisions is the concept of minor revisions. So 3D Experience doesn't support minor revisions like some other PDM or PLM systems. You kind of get A, B, C. You don't get those minor revisions, but you can set up a what's considered a primary and secondary revision format. So you could start off something as let's say _1 in work, and then if you wanted to create a _2, you would basically run the new revision command, and that would create the A_2. Now, once you released it, it would just go to A, and then when you made a new revision, it would then go to B, or probably B_1 there. So there is a way to sort of support, let's say, minor revisions, but it's not necessarily a apples to apples comparison, but there's a way to do it. Also, there's a way to support iterations in the system. So for example, we can set up the system to control or maintain the last 5 saved, CAD parts assemblies within the system as well as a iteration that's not really shown, but able to get to if you want. So we have revisions, we have primary and secondary revisions, and then we have a concept of iterations as well. Here's an example of the engineering definition where you can control that life cycle. You can't really add or remove boxes, but you can sometimes control the arrows of what the user can do from what state to what state, and you can create rules. For example, you can say, I cannot promote my assembly to released until all the children are automatically released in it. So you can create rules to control when you can do a promotion or demotion within the system. We talk about searching, so this goes into searching. When you search, let's say you search for washer, you get these different 6W tags that describe, the metadata around that data you searched on. And then you can filter it based on the tag. So based on what state it is, based on the CAD format, based on a supplier part number, based on who created it, etc. So if you want to do additional filtering on custom attributes you create in the system, you can set up the system to do that. And we're not going to go into it, but you build what's considered this RDF XML file. You can assign it to a broader category, which is like a what, who, where, how, 6W tags. That's what the 6 comes to, the what, who, where, why, how questions. And then you can import it into the vocabulary. Once you do that, you have to rerun your indexing model to re-index that data and do the reload cache. But then the new data will reflect those values in the search. So there's a way to add your own 6W tags if necessary. AI. So AI is the hot topic nowadays. And more and more AI is going to be built into the platform. Within 3D Swim today, there's already what's called Aurora, which is an AI assistant and like a chat bot to ask questions. But within 3D Experience, more and more AI is coming to the platform, and again, we can have a whole different presentation on it. Dassault's calling it its 7th generation capabilities. But whether it's AI to do predictive work when you're doing CAD design, identifying risks within project plans, etc., more functionality will be coming. But here's a quick screenshot of some beta functionality with chat functionality within the 3D Swim application. And I'd say we at xLM Solutions are also doing a lot with AI, and we're integrating various chat bots within the platform as well. And we have a demo out there that works with ChatGPT and Claude to ask questions about data, and it will go to the platform and provide that data back. Openness. If you need to customize, and we always say let's make out of the box work, let's work with out of the box, but companies' processes don't always meet out of the box functionality. So there's many different ways to customize the system. If you're on premise, there's the concept of JPOs and Java programs and JSP, Java server pages, MQL that can be used to customize the system. If you're on cloud or on premise, there's a whole set of web services that can be used to perform functionality within the system. If you're using dashboards, which is probably a lot of the on-premise customers are doing today, you can make use and create your own custom dashboards to provide unique user experiences to your customers. If you're working within the native client, there's EKL, which can be used to provide extended functionality around your native client operations. It also can work on the web in certain areas. And one thing is that EIN part number. If you want to create a custom part numbering mechanism, you can make use of EKL to do that. And then finally, there's what's considered the enterprise integration framework, which can be used to integrate 3DEXPERIENCE to other systems like ERP. And depending on what customization method you want to go, we have various links and webinars on those that we've conducted previously. Going in a little bit more detail into the enterprise integration framework. Again, this allows you to integrate 3DEXPERIENCE to ERP systems or other systems you have within your enterprise. And it works based on events. So you say, when should I trigger this event to send data to my external system, i.e. ERP? And maybe it's on state change, i.e. on release of my engineering item, of my item structure. So when that happens, basically a middleware will understand that the change happened. It will gather the data in 3DEXPERIENCE and then use that to send to your ERP system. Obviously, this is a very high level example of how that works. My favorite words, the devil's in the details, and integrating to ERP, there's a lot of details there, but the mechanism is there to transfer the data over. Business process management. So I talked about that in my change slide. So business process management is just an acronym, BPM. It really comprises of 3 roles within the platform: business process designer, business process player, and business process analysts. And with the designer, you can create your own business process, flow chart, Visio on steroids, call it what you want, with decisions, rejections, parallel tasks, automated tasks, manual tasks, etc. And then have that process, be able to, be tracked and monitored in a controlled manner to, do whatever process you want, whether that's change, whether that's non-conformance, whether that's a um, vacation request process. Any process you have, you can model it in the system and then execute it. But the beauty of this is it would work with all your engineering or all your PLM data that you have in the system as well. So that's another way to handle processes, and change is a key process. So I think this is a very powerful tool that or role that is offered within 3D Experience. All that being said, in conclusion, there's many things the platform can do. We strongly suggest a crawl, walk, run approach. Start with the basics. Maybe that's just CAD data management, and then grow into more functionality, whether that's managing change or handling issues or dealing with project management or requirement management. There's a long list of things we can do, but let's start small and then move into a more robust, PLM rollout. It's really key to understand how you want to work, how you're working today, and then how you want to map that functionality to the platform. There's definitely going to be trade-offs on how you work and how the platform works, and that's where we come in to help you best map over that functionality and configure the platform to work the best way it's designed to work, and the best way it'll work for you as an end customer. And then finally, there is a learning curve. There's a lot here, but don't worry, we're here to help you. With time and experience, training, etc. You get up to speed, and before you know it, it's you're like, how can I work with anything else? So don't be intimidated by it. But with that being said, I'm gonna say thank you, and here's a link to my information if you want to reach out with any additional information, and then the various links and YouTube videos I referenced throughout the presentation you can get here as well. But with that, I'll open it up to questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the question section within GoToMeeting, and I'll be happy to answer them to you. So the first question talked about the differences between revisions and the concept of branching revisions. So you can have a revision, you can create a revision pattern, A, B, C, D, and increment your revisions A, B, C, D, as normal. That's a very mechanical way of working. But then, in other disciplines, whether it's software, electrical, you have the ability to do branching. So off of revision A, you can branch into a branched revision, and go down that branching path. Perhaps it's a design study you're doing that you're branching those revisions on, and then if you find that branch to be acceptable, you can merge that back into the the main, let's say, revision sequence. So branching is a way to kind of do design studies, or depending on what type of work you're working on, a way to handle revisions differently, not just going from A to B, but branching it off. And then in theory, two people can work on the different branches, or multiple branches, and then merge it together. Next question: when assigning users to collab spaces, you didn't mention whether you can assign groups to collab spaces. So yes, you can assign users to a group and then assign that group as a specific role to the collab space. So yes, you can do it at the group level, not necessarily the user level. Can the BPM trigger an action such as an ECR? So we talked about different change objects within the system, change action, change order, change request. So the answer is yes, it can. Um, though to get a little bit more detailed, when BPM is doing actions within 3D Experience, it's calling 3D Experience web services. So as long as there's a web service to create that ECR or engineering change or whatever it is, and I know there are web services to create them, then yes, it can do it. Now, behind the scenes, it may use some tokens and whatnot, but 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 from a functional point of view, yes, it can do that. And to repeat, a BPM trigger or action can create change actions in the system. The next question talked about revisions versus versions. There's really no versions in the system. You only have revisions. Now you can have what's considered a revision, stamp or revision value that is just A, B, and C, or you can have a revision value that's A_1, A_2, but they're all revisions. And then the system can be set up to save, let's say, the last saved iterations, but that's more at the user level than anything that's seen throughout the system. We have a question here that says, I want to integrate 3D Experience to Microsoft Dynamics. What's involved? I'd say let's talk offline, but we can make use of that integration, enterprise integration framework roles to configure, extraction of your item structures, your bill of materials, your item masters, and then we basically transform that data and then call the dynamic APIs to import that into the system. What is an advantage of a web app over a native app? Well, certain apps only work in the web and certain apps only work through native apps, and then some work in both. Native apps are mainly used for more of your, let's say, hardcore engineering, your CAD design, your simulation, etc. Native apps are used a lot more in governance, approving data, running through those change actions, creating issues, associating data to bookmarks, etc. If you're using a web app, there's probably zero install needed. You just need to go to a web page. If you use the native app, then you need to install the native app software on the computer. Web apps run on the server, even though you have a browser. Native apps actually are running on the client computer. How long would a general, next question, how long would a general 3D experience implementation take? The answer really depends on what the scope of the implementation is and what you want to do with it. Some things can take, literally days to weeks to, work out of the box and some basic training and setup, where others can take, months plus if, involves data migration, a lot more complex process, definition mapped to it, etc. So it really depends on the scope of the work, but if you can, if you're a smaller organization and you can start working, immediately out of the box with no data migration, you can literally get up and running. That's the beauty of the cloud. And if you're more coming from a more structured, mature product or software, then it takes more time to map your processes over and migrate data, etc. All right. Will this presentation be available? So yes, you should get a recording to this webinar, but if you want the presentation itself, please email me and I'll make sure to get it to you. It looks like I have no more questions. I'm going to hang out here for another minute. If any more questions come in, feel free to type them or contact me per the screen. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining, and um, please reach out if you have any questions. Oh, one more question. Do you have any training courses? So the answer is yes. We have training courses more on some of the technical aspects of 3D experience, whether it's, programming with web services or programming with EKL, but then we can create, custom training for you if you wanted, general overview training, or more detailed training in a specific app or role, like, business process management. So simple answer is yes, we do training. And if you're interested in training, please again reach out to me and we can figure out the best course or plan for your training needs. All right, that looks like no more questions. So once again, thank you very much, and I am ending this webinar.